This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories: anger, boycotts and protests in some countries against South Africa after days of looting and violence targeting foreign-owned businesses. And highlighting another form of violence, demonstrators gather in Cape Town to protest against fatal attacks on women or femicide. Also in the program, the Supreme Pontiff tours Africa. Pope Francis begins a trip to Mozambique, Madagascar and Mauritius with a message of peace. And in sports, following the violence in South Africa, Zambia pull out of a friendly scheduled for Lusaka, saying it cannot guarantee Bafana Bafana's safety. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. There's been anger, boycotts and protests in some countries against South Africa after days of looting and violence targeting foreign-owned businesses. Nigeria is boycotting the World Economic Forum on Africa, taking place this week in Cape Town. The Nigerian branch of the South African mobile phone company, MTN, has closed its shops and service centers across the country after some were targeted in apparent reprisals. And Zambia's Football Association has cancelled an international friendly match against South Africa scheduled to take place on Saturday in the capital, Lusaka. Well, at least 7 people have died since Monday after mobs looted shops and torched trucks driven by foreigners in various parts of South Africa. We begin our coverage in Lagos, Nigeria, where retaliatory attacks targeting South African businesses have seen other nationalities caught up in the violence. Mayeni Jones reports.
On Tuesday morning, following calls on social media for the boycott of South African businesses in Nigeria, a group of protesters came to this ShopRite in the suburb of Lagos called Lekki. Initially, the protests were peaceful, but they soon turned violent.
They came and smashed the door. As they were smashing this door, that was then the police now opened fire. They started shooting the tear gas to scare all of them because their intention was to get into the ShopRite and start looting.
During the violence that happened at the nearby Circle Mall, 3 Chinese nationals who were driving nearby were stopped by some of the protesters. An eyewitness told us that they were asked whether they were South Africans. And even though they said no, they were dragged out of their car. One of them was stabbed and their car was set on fire. Later, they were escorted home by the police.
Well, there's been a massive reaction across the continent, with people taking to social media to express their thoughts. And Sumana B. Sayang says on Facebook, South Africa should remember that during their struggle for independence, African countries stood up for them by providing help with both arms and moral support till they got their freedom. Today, the same South Africa turns against their fellow African migrants. Very pathetic. Mbabwa Nyirenda in Malawi says on Facebook, this is not about being South African, Malawian, Zimbabwean, Nigerian or any other nationality. It's about values that connect humans to humanity being broken. Now, if the fiber that connects humans to humanity is broken, our societies and countries will remain in flames. And finally, WizKid says on Twitter, disheartening to watch these videos from my home. You're fighting the wrong war, fighting the wrong people. How do we walk around hating each other? Africa is one. We're all the same people. Please don't lose yourself. And there's a hashtag, say no to xenophobia, one love. Well, this is not the first time that we've seen attacks like these in South Africa, but some authority figures have appeared reluctant to describe them as xenophobic. The police have repeatedly described them as attacks on foreigners. So what is xenophobia? The Oxford Dictionary defines it as fear or hatred of foreigners, people from different cultures or strangers, fear or dislike of the customs dress of people who are culturally different from oneself. Well, let's bring in the BBC's Milton Kosi, who's following developments for us in Johannesburg. Milton, why are authorities there so reluctant to describe what's going on there as xenophobia?
It's very hard to say, Sophie, because one would say they are embarrassed. South Africans are hugely embarrassed by what is going on. Let there be no doubt about that. Many people feel ashamed to see how the looting has gone on shops and businesses that are believed to belong to foreign African immigrants in particular. But part of the reason is because there is a lot of criminality involved in these xenophobic attacks. So the police have been involved. They've arrested over 293 people, they say, and that is still ongoing even now. But there are many people, Sophie, who are South Africans, who are South African business people, who've also lost their livelihoods here. So it is not entirely true that it is only exclusively foreign immigrants, particularly of African descent, who've been targeted. The looting began with that in mind, you would say, but in the end it spiraled out of control, and there are many people who've been affected, both local and from outside the country.
You've mentioned the arrest of perpetrators, but the big question that a lot of people are asking is, what about the people behind the people who are committing the violent actions?
Yes, that's very hard to say. A lot of people have told us, local people, when we ask them, why are you doing this? They say that African immigrants have come to South Africa to take their job opportunities. Now, Sophie, let me take you back to the days of apartheid to try and answer this question that you've asked. Under apartheid, black people were fighting to be earning equal salaries to their white counterpart. But because of white minority rule, they were paid far less than what their white counterparts were getting. After the end of apartheid in 1994, they thought, okay, now we're going to come and rise up to the level of our white counterparts. In comes in the African immigrant who says, I will take the job for half the salary. And that is why, in part, you are having this problem. Remember, this immigration problem is not just a South African problem. You know that it has manifested itself through Brexit in the United Kingdom and through the Build the Wall campaign in the United States and in many other parts of the world.
Milton, very briefly, there's a big meeting happening there, the World Economic Forum. Is anyone even talking about it?
Oh, yes, indeed. President Cyril Ramaphosa had a moment's silence this morning when he was at a breakfast opening the WEF ceremonies, a separate part there of the conference. But he did have a moment's silence, and he's condemned the violence even from there. But South Africans are even more embarrassed because they have all these guests who have come to Cape Town for the World Economic Forum Africa conference. So that has created a lot of shame and embarrassment from the politicians and the officials. But a lot of people have come out, particularly church groups and civic associations, saying, not in my name. They stand with their African brothers.
All right, so Milton Nkosi for us there in Johannesburg. Thank you. Let's now take a quick look at some other stories making headlines across the world. Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, has formally withdrawn a highly controversial bill that would have allowed extradition to mainland China following months of sometimes violent pro-democracy protests. In a televised message, Ms. Lam announced a range of other measures that appeared to be designed to soothe unrest in the territory. But she appeared to reject the protesters' demand for an independent inquiry into police brutality. Now, a UN report says the United States, Britain and France could be complicit in war crimes in Yemen by arming and providing intelligence and logistics support to the Saudi-led coalition. Now, the report says Syria's human rights violations are being committed with impunity by all sides in Yemen's brutal conflict and has identified 164 individuals who may be responsible for international crimes. Now, a picture is emerging of the scale of devastation caused by Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas in what the Prime Minister, Hubert Minnis, has called one of the greatest crises in his nation's history. Mr. Minnis said the current number of 7 confirmed deaths was expected to rise. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come in sports, 3 German clubs withdrawn their cases over the eligibility of Hamburg's Gambian player Bakary Jatta. Peter will have the details. I'm Sophie Ikenye and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top story on this program: there's been anger, boycotts and protests in some countries against South Africa after days of looting and violence targeting foreign-owned businesses. Tear gas was also used to disperse crowds in Lagos, Nigeria, that have been carrying out retaliatory attacks targeting South African businesses. Well, let's stay in South Africa because the World Economic Forum has been taking place in Cape Town, but hundreds of protesters gathered in response to the rape and murder of a 19-year-old student 2 weeks ago and the killing of a boxing champion allegedly by her boyfriend. An online petition to declare gender-based violence in South Africa a state of emergency has received over 400,000 signatures. Now, femicide is the term used to describe gender-related killings of women and girls. According to the South African Demographic and Health Survey, femicide in the country is 5 times higher than the global average. The BBC's Vumani Mkhize sent this report from outside the World Economic Forum in Cape Town.
It's the first day of the World Economic Forum here in Cape Town. But as you can see behind me, protesters tired of gender-based violence are also determined to have their voices heard. Sparked by the brutal rape and murder of 19-year-old student Oyinene Mkhwetjana, protesters here are demanding that the South African government take action.
I'm tired of waking up in the news, waking up and seeing the news and people are dying, and it's unfortunate because it has absolutely, nothing to do with them, because people feel that they are entitled to our bodies and they aren't. Why must my autonomy be taken away so that you can feel good about yourself? I'm here to fight for all the people who are taken away and never got a chance to fight for themselves. I'm tired, I'm triggered, and everybody needs to stop. Personally, I'm hoping that the world opens its eyes, because South Africa is very good at hiding its problems behind closed doors, and this is not just a South Africa problem, it's a world problem. It needs to stop being hidden. We need to stop hiding the stories. We need to stop covering it up. We need to stop doing things for the clout. People need to be aware that this is happening, because when you are unaware, that's when you are most at danger.
In all honesty, I've never been cut so deep by a murder, by the death of a stranger. It feels as if she's one of us and we are one of her. This should stop. It's high time South Africa must take action. We demand action. We demand justice. I feel like Cyril Ramaphosa is looting the entire nation. Posts have been going on social media. We haven't seen a statement from him. We haven't seen a mere tweet from him. Nothing. Maybe if it was a female president, maybe we would have seen change. I don't know.
We want a state of emergency. We want a state of emergency.
Well, Pope Francis has started the first stage of his 3-nation tour of the Indian Ocean African countries, his 4th visit to the continent since he became the head of the Roman Catholic Church in 2013. He arrived in Mozambique earlier this evening and is expected to address the country's peace process and the devastation caused by recent cyclones. Now, in 2 days' time, he'll then travel to Madagascar and he will end in Mauritius. These pictures came in about an hour ago, if we can find them. Nope, they're not. Yeah, but we had some pictures a little earlier of him arriving in Maputo. But we can now speak to the BBC's Martin Bashir, who is there for us. Martin, specifically, what's the Pope doing there? He's arrived, we understand.
Yes, it was an 11-hour flight. We've literally just got off the plane. He was greeted with a military guard. There were groups of dancers. On the flight over, he talked about the fact that he was enthused by the youthfulness of Mozambique, but also wanted to come and console the people following these 2 dreadful cyclones, completely unprecedented in a single season in March and April. So he's here, and tomorrow he'll begin a number of events. In the morning, he'll be addressing an inter-religious gathering of young people. He'll then speak to government diplomatic corps, members of the government administration and civil service. And we expect him to emphasize those 2 things that are very much a part of his pontificate: concern for the planet and concern for the poor. And in this part of the world, as you know, the planet has been suffering Since the 1970s, something like 8 million hectares of forest in Mozambique has been chopped down. This has now become one of the places where companies come to take rosewood. And so that made the country even more vulnerable to the weather conditions that arose earlier this year. So he's going to talk about that, and of course you'll remember that in 2015 he published that encyclical on the environment called Laudato Si, where he talked about our common home and that there is a biblical reason for caring about the world. It's not something that's pie in the sky when you die, but it's an instruction from God for all of us now on the planet. So he's going to talk about that, and then of course he's going to talk about the poor. The World Bank estimates that something like 80% of the population of Mozambique don't have enough money to eat a balanced diet. And one of the things that this Pope has railed against is the pomp and the ceremony of clericalism within the church. He has identified himself repeatedly with the poor. You'll know, for example, that he doesn't even live in the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican. He lives in the guest house, Santa Marta. So those are the two themes that he's going to drive home here. He'll be here for 2 days. We'll be with him. Then we'll go to Madagascar for 2 days. And then there will be a short 8-hour visit into the Mauritius island.
All right, Martin Bashir for us there in Maputo. Thank you. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sports. Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. And it's just over a year since France won the FIFA World Cup in Russia, but the race to win it in Qatar in 2020 has begun in earnest with first leg qualifying matches played today across several African cities. We already have some of the results in. Burundi drew 1-1 at home with Tanzania's Taifa Stars. Namibia scored twice to beat a resilient Eritrea 2-1 in Asmara. Djibouti hosted Eswatini and needed a 74th minute goal from Abdi Hamza to beat the visitors 2-1. One more game still to come tonight as Liberia host Sierra Leone. Kickoff is in just about 10 minutes' time. Now, South Africa will host Madagascar on Saturday in a hastily arranged friendly. That is after Zambia pulled out of their planned meeting at the weekend. Chipolopolo were due to host South Africa in Lusaka on Saturday, but the Football Association of Zambia told South African media that it could not guarantee the safety of the visiting team. It comes after days of looting and violence in South African cities of Johannesburg and Pretoria, targeting foreigners, in which at least 7 people have died. The Nigeria Football Federation is facing another corruption probe. This time, the country's anti-corruption agency, the EFCC, is conducting a new investigation into its finances. The EFCC is looking into allegations that sponsorship money meant for the development of football in the country has been stolen. BBC Sport understands that the investigation, dating back to before the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, will focus on money generated from the NFF's official sponsors, domestic leagues, television sponsorship, and payments from a former kit supplier of all national teams. Now, some African pride has been restored at the ongoing Basketball World Cup today as Nigeria and Angola recorded their first wins in 3 matches at the tournament taking place in China. Nigeria beat South Korea by 108 points to 66, while Angola defeated the Philippines 84-81. Tunisia, though, lost by just 3 points to Puerto Rico, and Ivory Coast are yet to win a game in the competition, losing 63-80 to Poland. Let's talk karate now. The sport is set to make its debut at the Olympic Games in Tokyo next year, and one man aiming to be there is Mundo Sene, captain of Senegal's karate team. We went to meet him to hear how the martial art arrived in Senegal and why he believes the West African country can make an impact in the sport.
When I was young, my dad wanted us to do sports. It was the era of Bruce Lee and Jean-Claude Van Damme on TV. We wanted to do Kung Fu like we saw it on TV. But there weren't Kung Fu facilities in Chickasaw. But my dad said, I have a friend who has karate facilities. I'm going to sign you up and we'll see how you like it. Fortunately for me, we tried the sport for one day and we fell in love with it. And that's how I started karate. Karate arrived in Senegal in the 1960s with the French military. They were Vietnamese, but part of the French military. It was really a chance for us to embrace karate, not only because it is a great sport, but because it is a sport to build character and create leadership.
Au-delà de l'aspect sportif, permet de former des gens, permet de former des leaders. Okay, donc la consigne pédagogique, c'est de ne pas faire un, ensuite de faire deux. Okay, mais de rester sur un, ensuite deux. Alors, c'est le moment pour le Sénégal de se...
It is time for Senegal to show itself in karate, because for the first time in the history of the sport, it is going to be in the Olympics. So it will give an opportunity to those who practice karate to compete in a competition as prestigious as the Olympics. And for Senegal, it is a chance to earn an Olympic medal, because it is a sport that has given Senegal world champions. So now we are at the level where we can win an Olympic medal.
And all the best of luck to him. Sophie, that's your sports.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Now, a plane belonging to Air Tanzania, which was impounded in South Africa, has now been released and flown home after a legal battle. The plane had been seized as part of a case in which a retired farmer was seeking compensation from the government of Tanzania. The BBC's Nomsa Maseko reports from Johannesburg.
The Airbus, which was grounded more than a week ago, it's a significant part of Tanzania's national carrier. It was impounded in Johannesburg by a farmer hoping to enforce an arbitration claim against the East African country's government. At issue is a demand for a $33 million outstanding compensation, for which Hermanus Steyn, the Namibian-born farmer, says is owed to him after his land was nationalized. The Tanzanian government has been fighting to get its plane back and finally succeeded on Wednesday.
The order of the court dated 21st August 2019 under case number 28994 of 2019 is hereby set aside. 2. The first respondent is liable to pay the cost of the application, including the cost occasioned by the employment of 2 counsel. I hand down the judgment.
The Tanzanian government says it has already complied by paying part of the compensation owed to the farmer and that there was no need to attach the plane.
Out of $30 million which Mr. Steyn was supposed to be paid according to the court order, he has already been paid over $20 million. Therefore, this is a proof that the Tanzanian government is paid, and we are advising him to go back to Tanzania to pursue his balance there, instead of just window shopping the jurisdiction of different courts.
My client does not have the right to attach the aircraft.
Lawyers representing Mr. Steyn refused to comment on camera but described the ruling as a complete failure of justice. And after 2 separate judges ruled that the plane should be released, it remains unclear what other legal avenues Mr. Steyn will pursue.
As proceedings were concluded in this court, the Air Tanzania plane left South Africa destined for Dar es Salaam. This essentially means that the fight for the farmer to get back what is owed to him needs to go back to the courts in Tanzania. Nomsa Maseko, BBC News, Johannesburg High Court.
Before we go, a quick look at our top story on Focus on Africa. There's been anger, boycotts and protests in some countries against South Africa after days of looting and violence targeting foreign-owned businesses. In Lagos, Nigeria, tear gas was used to disperse protesters targeting South African businesses. And the government has said it's boycotting the World Economic Forum on Africa. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm at Sikenye. Thanks for your company.